are having a little bit of trouble with the formatting that I want in class for briefing. So here's a short little video to kind of show you a specific example on the current topic. So first off, on my screen I have verbatim open. While you're not required to use verbatim, you're silly not to, as it's specifically designed to help debaters and to help you debate online in order to be able to find your evidence very, very quickly. Also, if the entire team is doing the same thing, it's incredibly easier to share stuff because you don't have to reformat everything. So it's significantly better if you learn it right away. There's a couple of things here. Number one, I'm using a Mac computer instead of a Windows-based device. My verbatim is going to look a little bit uglier than yours and a little bit more confusing. This is my ribbon toolbar here. These are my verbatim shortcut keys. I can either click them or I can hit the shortcut key on it in order to be able to do what the macro is told to do. I have here an F box. This here is called the pocket, or F4. I want to have two of these in my topic document, one being AF and one being neg. So here I'm going to highlight the neg and hit the button for F4 pocket. You'll see here in the navigation panel, I created a section for neg. Let's say that I'm neg in the round. I can get rid of my AF evidence in the navigation panel and just look at my neg box. Likewise, if I'm AF instead of neg, I can close that and open up my AF evidence to be able to know. I don't have to scroll through everything. So that's the pocket. The next thing that you have is going to be the hat or the block. Honestly, in Lincoln Douglas, these are pretty interchangeable, and you probably only need one. It's an idea for subdivision. So hat is going to be the next biggest. So for instance, I could make my hat about value. Anything that would go underneath value would then be a block, which would be F6. All of these go underneath value and relate in my navigation panel. So for instance, I could call this front lines, and then I could F6 this one so that my front lines can be collapsed in here in order to be able to designate where they are. All I want to do is to be able to find my evidence very quickly in the limited prep time that I'm going to be given. So my front line that I did in class was AF. I labeled my hat or block as they say CV, or compulsory voting leads to forced opinions. As a hat, I'm not going to necessarily read this in round. So I can use any language or jargon that I want, because it's not going to make it onto the judge's ballot in any way, shape, or form. It's for me to find something. Here, however, you will say in round. Right before the dash is going to be my tag. Voluntary voting has the same downside. That's what I want the judge to write down. I then have written out an explanation of the argument for me to read in round, or as a reminder for me to be able to say something along these lines. My second tag then is CV doesn't require a vote, or compulsory voting doesn't require a vote. Once again, I then have an explanation. The dash tells me that I'm going to want to pause so that I can have the judge have time to be able to write that down. Now, this is just logic that I've briefed, and you're going to do a whole lot of that in Lincoln Douglas, but there are plenty of Lincoln Douglas debaters out there that will bully you for victory with evidence, meaning they'll try to argue that their piece of evidence is superior to your logic. Now, there's a number of reasons why that's not automatically true, but some judges will listen to that, and so sometimes you have to fight evidence with evidence. So let's talk about how to brief evidence, which is very similar to this with a couple of slight differences. So first off, I just went to Google and I did a simple search, Australia, uninformed opinions in quotation marks. That means it'll search for those two words together. and I searched for compulsory voting. Once again, I put it in quotation marks so that it'll search for it together. Now, honestly, I really didn't like these hits, okay? The johnlocke.org probably is a pretty decent one for LD, but at this point in time, it's 13 years old. So I'd like to find something a little bit better, newer. Something like Reddit might be good for ideas. However, it's not going to be something that I can really work into my speech because it's not a credible site. Scholarly articles are wonderful. I personally like Google News. Now you'll notice even though I'm in Google, I'm going to get radically different hits here. Same search, still within Google, but different hits. No one thing on the internet searches the entire internet. Here in Google News, I'm going to get news sources, which is nice because A, they're all published, and B, they're typically going to be more recent. There's a number of articles that I would cut here, including the Stanford one, The Case for Mandatory Voting, the DePaulia, Why Don't We Vote Like Australia, including a bunch of others like the Washington Post, A Case for Compulsory Voting, New York Times, Voting Should Be Mandatory. At this point in time, you can see that the current U.S. liberal publications are going to be more of the AF side, which means you've got to go conservative for the negative side on this. This article I found really fascinating here from Reason, titled Justifying a Moral Duty to Vote is a Lot Harder Than You Might Think. As I read through this, there honestly were about 20 or 30 different pieces of evidence that I would probably go with here, okay? So when I'm reading articles, and yes, you're going to have to read articles, there's no shortcut to avoid that, that's how you gain knowledge, there's two first rules. First one is, if I cut a card, which means to copy and paste it, I need to start at the beginning of a sentence. So I can start here at in, I cannot start at missed. I can't start at have, I have to start at the. I also need to end at a punctuation mark. So I could cut this card. However, I want to be very careful about words like but, because I can't cut it short to where I'm going to change the author's intent. So if I cut it here with leaving out the but, I may not be representing Ilya Solin's viewpoints correctly. I also can't end it here because a semicolon is not an end punctuation mark. As I said, I would cut about 20 different pieces of evidence from this. As I was previewing the article to make sure I didn't putz around trying to find an article for you, okay, I went down to a specific card that I wanted to do. I like this aspect. Finally, it's worth emphasizing, as Jason recognizes, that bad voting can often be worse than no voting at all. I summarize the reasons why here. It then goes through some reasons. What is true of voters who are simply ignorant also applies to many who may be relatively knowledgeable but are highly biased in their evaluation of facts. The problem with ignorant and biased voting is not that it might enable the wrong candidate or party to win, but it also reduces the quality of those choices to begin with. Politicians and parties that know they are facing a largely ignorant electorate with lots of political fans are likely to run on platforms that seek to cater to that ignorance and bias. Donald Trump did so in 2016, but more conventional politicians also routinely use similar tactics, even if in less extreme ways. The result is a general degradation of the quality of government policy and political discourse. This is what we call an impact to the concept of uninformed voters. Impacts tend to be extremely important in debate, and they tend to be a little bit difficult to find in evidence. So we have a really good impact here of uninformed voting. So I've copied it. I'm now going to make a hat. Uninformed voters. I'm going to make this a hat. Then I'm going to make a block. Remember, I'm not going to say that in round, so I can use debate jargon and debate terms. I know this is where my impact is, so I'm going to make it into a block. I'm then going to copy and paste it. So I've already copied it. I'm going to hit Control F to paste it. And first off, that did a pretty good job. Okay? I can also paste with F2, and it will take out any hyperlinks for me and just do an extra step that's kind of nice. You'll notice here, it doesn't quite end right. So I'm going to go back to my original document, and it does say we're not so sorry. So that is actually what the document says, so I'm okay with that. I'm just going to add the period that was there. Those spaces are going to make it difficult here. So I'm going to go up and hit this condense button on verbatim, and it's going to take away those enter spaces for me. Again, all of this is designed to make it very easy for you. Now, if I were to read this piece of evidence, that's going to take me 2-3 minutes. That's not a good use of my speech time. So I'm going to underline this to keep the author's intent while making it the most powerful thing that I can read for what I want, which is the concept of an impact here. Okay? I'm going to hit F9, which is underline, to be able to identify that this is what I want to read. I also have F10, which allows emphasis. So if I really want to remind myself to emphasize that point, like exacerbate the already severe problem, I'm going to hit F10. I am allowed, if I don't change the author's context, to underline part of a word, but again, I can't change the context. So I don't need politicians and parties. I'm just going to pick one of them. That saves me a second there. Okay. I'm not going to use Donald Trump because I don't want a distraction in there and suddenly they're going to attack, well, that's just Trump, those types of things. Because I've got here more conventional politicians routinely use. So I'm just going to go politicians. There's no exact way to do this. This is a skill that you get better at the more that you do. But I want to get in here the concept of impacts. So I've underlined my card to make it significantly shorter. I have to leave everything in here because if they call into question what it is that I'm saying, whether I'm taking it out of context, I need to be able to show them the original card. The last thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to hit this shrink button. There's no shortcut key for this. It's going to shrink everything that is not underlined for me, making it easy to read. Now there's two more parts that I have to do to make this an official brief. Remember how I said the hat or the block is not going to be said in round, so I can do it in debate jargon. I still need a tag that will be said in round. I want something that's 5 to 9 words that captures the essence of this card, that the judge can write down for what this card represents, okay? So I'm going to want uninformed voters, decay, government, policy, and discourse. I'm getting words like policy and discourse from the card specifically, okay? Notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, so I'm within my 5 to 7 range. I'm then going to highlight it, and I'm going to hit F7, which is this tag button. And you'll notice it just popped up in here. So once again, if I'm in round, first off, I realize I'm AF, so I'm going to open up my AF files. They've attacked my uninformed voters. So I'm going to click on that and see what I've got. Ooh, I've got some impacts, and I've got one about uniformed voters decay government policy and discourse. That's my tag I'm going to write on my flow. The last thing I need is the citation. A citation is not a website. Ignore that. The website is just the page number that you click on. You never say it like that. And you want to have authors that are going to be credible, and you want to know what you're going to read in round. I use something called Site Creator, which you can get free from the Google Chrome extension store. If you just Google Chrome extension store, you can pull that up and you can search for the extension Site Creator, 2 words, C-I-T-E, Creator. And when it's on, every web page that you open up will have this type of box here. It has pulled the citation for me. It has also graded itself. It considers itself to have done a B job on this. If you end up seeing something in the D range or the F range, you really want to double check it. If things are missing, I just need to go through the article and actually look through and kind of figure out these types of things. Okay? So I've copied that, and I'm going to hit F2, and it's going to format it nicely for me. Now notice I'm not going to hit Control Paste, because I'll get this ugly thing, and then I have to go clear the formatting in order to do that, which is an extra step, so I'm always going to hit F2. Now, this still is something that's not quite readable in round. I don't know who Ilya Somin is. So ultimately, I need to be able to establish credibility here. So I'm going to look here, and I see that Ilya Somin writes for the Volkov conspiracy. That sounds pretty shady. So I'm probably not going to lead with that. In this case, I'm probably going to lead with reason. However, you don't want to do things lazy. So what is the Volkov conspiracy? It's a bunch of contrarian law professors, okay? Typically libertarian. I can write all of this in my citation. So next to Ilya's name, I'm going to write that she is with the Volkov conspiracy, which is a group of mostly law professors who are often libertarian. Okay? Now again, I can read all of that. Reason is good enough for this one. And I'm going to write that it's August 25th, 2020. I don't want to have to think any more than I have to in a round. So I don't want to be standing up giving a speech and trying to remember what is the name of the 8th month of the year. I would rather just write it out right now when I can think about that. The last thing that I do with the site is the part that I'm going to read, I'm going to highlight, and then I'm going to hit F8 for cite. That makes it nice there. Now in round, I can write this tag on my flow. As soon as I see the tag on my flow, I then go to my evidence, which if you use verbatim, you then can send to speech, but that's another video. I read my tag. I pause so the judge can write it down. I then read my cite, reason, August 25th, 2020. I then read my evidence. Bad voting can often be worse than no voting at all. Those who choose to vote, not to vote, are even less well informed about politics and public policy than current voters are. If they are forced to go to the polls, they will exacerbate the already severe problem of political ignorance. They are incentivizing politicians to cater to their ignorance. They act like political fans cheering on their side rather than truth seekers. The problem with ignorant and biased voting is not just that they might enable the wrong candidate to win, but it also reduces the quality of those choices to begin with. Parties that know they are facing a largely ignorant electorate, politicians routinely use different tactics as I read it and practice it. That was wonky, so I'm going to clear that. and shrink it again. The result is a general degradation in the quality of government policy and political discourse. I can work to make this even shorter by highlighting it down. It all depends upon what you're comfortable with. Now, first off, you now know how to find this article as well as a whole bunch of other really good articles on this topic that are all briefable. You and your teammates can work together to do this process so it's not one person cutting 10 or 15 different cards. Instead, it's everybody cutting 5 or 6 cards and then sharing them in the exact same format. That's a way to get ready significantly quicker and more effectively. Do you need to use all of this evidence in round? No, but it sure is nice to have it. You want to be able to organize your files for the day where your files get really, really big and you have hundreds of pieces of evidence and arguments in here, because each one then becomes very easy to be able to figure out and find in your navigation panel. Hat, tag, cite, card. Hope that helps.